This is the third part of the Shona-Ndebele tensions. A few things stand out after this pre-colonial encounter between Matebele or Nguni and the residents of the Zambezi Limpopo plateau. First, Matebele, Sotho and Swati settled among the Kalanga and Rozvi residents. Second, Mzilikazi's strategic plan to incorporate many inhabitants into his military system was successful. That is why, during the time of Mzilikazi's death, the Ndebele state was stronger. According to Sabelo Ndlovu Gatsheni, in addition to the Swati and the Sotho, the Mthwakazi or Ndebele nation was composed of the Rozvi, the Kalanga, the Hera, the Maungwe, the Tonga, the Korekore, the Shangwe, the Zezuru, and so on. All these Bantu clans and totems are blood relatives of the present-day Bantu who are politically grouped under the Shona language. Ndlovu Gatsheni says by the time of Ndebele's permanent settlement on the southwestern part of the Zimbabwean plateau after 1840, what had started as a small Kumalo clan had expanded over time into a diversified nation consisting of various ethnic groups. Inside this nation, people were grouped into izigaba depending on their origins. The Abezansi, the Nguni minority being the ruling elite, the Ado-Ndlela, the Sotho and other high-veiled people. Some scholars say they were second in the ruling hierarchy, and the Amaholingubo, people of the robes, the majority comprised of the Kalanga, the Rozvi and many others. This historical inclusive hegemonic definition of being Ndebele observes the Ndebele nation as a pre-colonial form of a rainbow nation. It was normal that the pre-colonial nation building in Southern Africa was done through conquest. In today's world, democracy or peace building is a proven way to build a nation. Let's get back to the events that followed in Lobengula's era up to the end of the Ndebele state. The Ndebele raiders' tendency to spread across the country caused damage to many residents, including the Njanja, the Hera of Mthwakazi, and the Nyashanu. By 1870, the Ndebele had raided Mthwakazi after mutilating his sub-ruler Nyoka. Chizema tried to invade Buyera at this time, but despite the Ndebele's backing, he wasn't successful. The pursuit of the Rozvi Mambo and his associate Nyandoro led the Ndebele to the northeast, up the watershed of the whole country over open grassy plains. After the lung sickness of 1861 had reduced the herds, these areas were important to the Ndebele economy as cattle sources. The route to the north led to the trade routes of the heart of the old Mutapa state and was important economically because it ran through some of the biggest gold fields and across river valleys that were full of elephants. For 4 years from 1860, the Ndebele attacked, sending Loche to raid Wata's associate and neighbor Chiweshe. After these major campaigns, the Ndebele succeeded in making several Shona political units tributary to them. This relationship involved the payment of articles of some sort of symbolic value, such as skins, feathers, horse, tobacco, spears, or services such as labor for hut building. Such tribute represented a considerable diversion of valuable man hours among people living in a large subsistence economy. There was a tendency among Shona to rebel against Ndebele's dominance despite the strong attraction of Ndebele society to them. In many of the tributary lands farthest from the main Ndebele state, the tributary relationship took the form of an alliance between a Shona faction that relied upon Ndebele support against its rivals. An eastern boundary of Ndebele tributaries ran from the Korekore River to Chirumanzu, south to Chivi, and then south across the low veld to Matebele. This boundary varied from year to year depending upon the political situation in the border areas. Among them were Wange, the Shangwe of the Mafungavusi plateau, Nemakonde, Wata, and Mutekeza, which were all outlying tributaries separated by nearly unoccupied areas. The wars of the 1850s established the dominance of the Ndebele in the region of the old Changamire state. The campaigns of the 1860s wiped out the last power of the Rozvi and gave the Ndebele a strong economic advantage. The Shona, after all, were descendants of the creators of the most impressive Iron Age material culture in southern Africa, from Zimbabwe to Kami. By comparison with most polities of that area, many Shona rulers held quite big territories with great defensive sites. In the south, Kimberley diamond fields opened. Guns became more readily available as Europeans adopted rifles, and British, Afrikaner, and Portuguese expansionist ambitions helped the Karanga speakers. With the sale of gold and ivory and the labor opportunities in Kimberley and the Rand, the Karanga had a big advantage over the Ndebele in the 1860s. It wasn't easy anymore for the Ndebele to penetrate. In the 1860s, Chivi was tributary to the Ndebele, but from 1870, in the reign of Mazorodze, the Mari accessed guns from the vendor and owned a significant herd of cattle guarded by strong men. This was a threat to Ndebele's power. In 1879, a major force under Loche and Manyeu attacked the Mari capital of Nyaningwe. The Ndebele force, consisting of the Mbizo, Ibuto, and Nyaningwe, were defeated. Their only success was the capture and execution of Chivi. In the year 1880, Gaza was defeated by Gutu in the Battle of Rasa Mountain. This time marked the beginning of a rift between the Ndebele and their ally, the Chaminukas medium of the Upper Umfuli. Up until then, Lobengula paid the spirit medium tribute in return for religious services, and in that year they raided the area north of Hunyani. At the same time, Chaminuka claimed that he, not Lobengula, had the power to grant hunting rights to Europeans in the area. Chaminuka's son, Jugu, had said that his father would show Lobengula that he owned the country beyond the Umneati River, and that if necessary he could drive the Europeans by his magic. This is why Lobengula killed Chaminuka's medium in 1883. The Ndebele raided the Shawasha country of the Chinamora, whose people had been accused of stealing Chaminuka's cattle. In 1882, sailors noted that Ndebele had reached the Mthwakazi River west of the Mvukwe range, and in 1887 there was a major raid on the Mvukwe area, probably the one led by Gwasa against the Shona ruler Chipuriro. This was a revival of the policy of the 1860s to gain control of the trade routes to the Zambezi. For beyond Chipuriro lay the prazos of Matekenya, Jose de Arujo Lobo, who contacted the Ndebele earlier buying their ivory. In 1888, a major raid struck at the Mashaya Mombe and Ruizi people of the Umfuli Valley. This attack may have been to prevent a renewal of the Chaminuka cult. Another fact may have been a result of the fact that the Shona were growing stronger. Isolated Ndebele were liable to be killed if they were discovered. In 1887, a whole group of Ndebele was killed, and indeed, the 1888 raid suffered so severely that Lobengula was very upset. According to Montagu, the Shona were indeed beginning to match the Ndebele power. This was greatly advanced by the Portuguese, who were seeking to counter British expansion by limiting the power of the Ndebele upon which Rhodes' claims were based. Led by Victor Cordon, the Portuguese reached Nemakonde and Maungwe respectively and made treaties with Shona rulers across the country from the Mafungavusi Plateau to the Upper Sabi. Portuguese flags were distributed as a result of submission, although they were not taken seriously by the Shona. Many guns were donated by the Portuguese. The effect of the treaties was to give every north of the Umnyati River Shona polity a good increase in the size of its armory. The Portuguese Bazungu Tower to the Charumbira Mapanzure Bere group of 1872 had few guns for sale as compared to 1889 towers to a single ruler. This was a huge increase in Shona's military strength. According to oral history, all this political development was anti-Ndebele. As a result, the effects on the balance of power between the Ndebele and the Shona became massive. Wata, Nemakonde, Mutekeza, and some of the Shangwe abandoned their loyalty to Lobengula and accepted the Portuguese guns. There were no major raiding forces of Ndebele ever into the central Shona area. Many agreed to the point that the revolt against Ndebele's power extended as far south as Gutu. From 1889, the Gaza state was gone, and the death of Bangure in Chirumanzu allowed his brother Chatikobo, aided by Sam Roji, to lead the people into their first revolt since 1857. However, the arrival of the British in 1890 changed the situation. Lobengula was thoroughly opposed to the arrival of Rhodes' men on his eastern frontier. However, he remained functionally neutral to the extent that he did not attack the pioneer column. After the Portuguese had been driven away by the British, he took advantage of the British presence to regain control over Nemakonde and Chirumanzu, despite his loss of Wata and Mutekeza. And again, this was only possible with the cooperation of other Shona interest groups. In 1891, Chinyama, son of Bangure, drove out his uncle Chatikobo and became the new Chirumanzu with Ndebele aid. At the end of the year, some Ndebele visited the Nemakonde area and after consultation with an important spirit medium, assassinated Nemakonde Hodza and 4 others in an action that proved to be a coup by an internal group. In 1892, a similar split in the Gutu dynasty and an appeal for Ndebele's help by Mthwakazi led to a joint Chirumanzu Ndebele force installing him as ruler. For a long period, the low-veld area had been subjected to raiding. However, the decisive area was around Chivi and Zimuto. Chivi was raided in late 1891 as a result of Rhodes, who was trying to prove Lobengula's dominance of the area. In mid-1892, a major raid on Chivi and Zimuto led Chivi to appeal to Rhodes' deputy, Jameson. This appeal led to a command to Ndebele raiders to stay away from the town of Victoria and the main road. It seems the Ndebele submitted for a while until the major raid of July 1893. This raid was to a lesser extent a result of Karanga's actions. History says earlier in 1893, raiders from Bere and the Makamure house of Zimuto stole cattle from Mpakame, a Shona tributary of the Ndebele. Mpakame reported to his Ndebeleized superior, Lukuluva. In retaliation, Lukuluva raided Bere, but he was resisted by the British Company police. Lukuluva reported to his superior, Mgandane. This led to the famous raid in July on Bere and Zimuto near Victoria, the Battle of 18 July, and Rhodes' decision to overthrow the Ndebele state. Before the British columns set out, Karanga raiders were moving in to take Ndebele cattle. As the Victoria column began to move towards its places in the north with the Salisbury column, it was joined by large forces of Shona. They penetrated deep into Golwayo. These Anglo-Karanga alliances of 1893 had a profound effect on the subsequent history of the southern Shona, especially in 1896. As the Ndebele state fell, Shona raiders from all over the southern Shona country and from as far as the upper Sabi Valley began to move towards the Ndebele heads. And the end of the Ndebele power in the summer of 1893, Shona raiders struck deep into the Ndebele kingdom.